Hello and welcome to the Business Talk podcast. I'm your host Deepak. Let's extend a warm welcome to Professor Laura Veldkamp as she joins us on our podcast. Professor Laura is an American economist teaching as a professor of finance at Columbia University's Graduate School of Business and also serves as a co-editor of the Journal of Economic Theory. She holds a Ph.D. in economics from Stanford Graduate School of Business and has served as a board member and chair of the governance committee for the American Finance Association. Additionally, she serves on the American Economic Association's Awards Committee and co-chairs the program committee for the Society for Financial Studies annual conference. Professor Veldkamp is a fellow of several prestigious institutions, including the Econometric Society and the National Bureau of Economic Research. Her research focuses on the impact of data and AI on markets, consumers, and the macroeconomy. Professor Veldkamp's research explores how the use of data and AI by investors and firms impacts consumers, the macroeconomy, marks up economic measurement, and financial valuations. In this episode, Professor Laura shares valuable insights from her latest book, The Data Economy, Tools and Applications. Professor Laura Veldkamp, it's an honor and privilege to have you join us today.
Thank you, Deepak. I'm delighted to be here.
Professor Veldkamp, your book explores the central role of data in modern economies. What inspired you to focus on this emerging field, and why do you think economic theory has largely neglected the role of data until now?
Great question. So data is hard to measure, right? We can't see it, we can't feel it, we don't even agree necessarily on what units to use. I mean, yes, we have bytes and megabytes and terabytes, but you could have a terabyte of noise that's much less valuable than a very small file that has just the information that you need. So economists like to measure things, right? Economics is filled with trade-offs. On the one hand, this, and on the other hand, that. And how do we get around that? Well, we say, this hand is much bigger, it's much more important, and this one turns out to be relatively small, and on net, the forces go this way. So for economics to be useful, we really do need to measure things, but data is this challenge. But at the same time, if we think about the most valuable firms in the world today, right, it's Amazon and Apple and Google, and these firms are valued largely for their data, right? So we can't just stick our heads in the sand and say, well, but I don't know how to measure it, so let me pretend it's not there, right? And that's what a lot of economics is doing. So what we're trying to do is say, well, maybe we don't have perfect measurement tools yet, but let's start at the beginning and let's build up ways of thinking about data so that we can get to a point where we can measure it with some confidence and use it like any other input in the modern economy.
In the data economy, you draw on macroeconomics and finance frameworks to model data economies. Could you explain how these tools help incorporate the value and strategic importance of data into economic theory?
Right. So, data has a lot of similarities with physical capital, but it also has some differences. So, like physical capital, and by physical capital, I mean the machines and structures that the firms use to produce. You can accumulate data, but you also need to maintain it. Like physical capital, it depreciates. So if you have, let's say, data about consumer preferences from 15 years ago, it's not that valuable for marketing anymore, but it's more valuable than data from 50 years ago, right? That's going to be wildly out of date. So data has these similarities to other kinds of assets that are more traditional that we've thought about, but obviously also has some differences. So, for example, data is what we call non-rival, meaning you can use a data set and you can copy it, and I can use the same data set at the same time, right? Whereas we can't both use the same pen to write at the same time. It's a rival good. So the fact that we can copy it changes the economics enormously. It creates a lot more scope for returns to scale. So we use these structures to capture data where data is similar to assets that we've previously been valuing and analyzing, but also to highlight the differences and build some of those differences in to meaningfully account for this new kind of asset in the economy.
Professor, you argue that data is a strategic asset that reduces uncertainty and enhances prediction. How do you define the economic worth of data, and how can businesses effectively measure this value?
Yeah, so this is a tough one. So let me start with uncertainty. So, one of the reasons that we take a macro and finance approach to this is that these are really the fields in economics that deal most with uncertainty. And uncertainty is central to the discussion of data because data reduces uncertainty. It's a central characteristic, right? With more data, you can estimate something more precisely, you can forecast some future event with greater confidence. Even, if we think about what is AI at its core, right? Yes, it helps us to write nice paragraphs and produces beautiful images and automate stuff and so forth. But at its core, it's really a prediction technology. It's about taking a large body of data and developing and selecting models for prediction. So we really start from the idea that data is fuel for prediction. And then, how do firms value this prediction? Well, there are lots of things that firms need to predict, right? They want to predict how many workers should I hire? They want to predict, how much of this good or that good should I have in inventory? They might want to, predict their future cost of capital. They might want to, predict which goods to produce or which ads to serve to which consumers, which customers. So all of these are prediction problems that firms do. And so, different kinds of data can be helpful for all of these things. So, the way we think about valuing data is asking, well, how much would you have to pay a firm to operate without this data, right? And be willing to give it up? Or how much would a firm be willing to get some data that it doesn't currently have and kind of be indifferent, be equally profitable on a risk-adjusted basis without it? So really, we think about data as valuing data as any other financial asset, which is, it's got risk and return properties.
Very insightful. The book covers a range of applications, from firm level data choices to macroeconomic and financial impacts. Could you share how data influences inflation, pricing dynamics, and production structures in the economy?
So believe it or not, data is holding down prices. And I say believe it or not because, of course, in many areas of the world, we've experienced really large price growth in the last few years. And that's for reasons that have nothing to do with data, right? But without data, we would probably be experiencing more price growth, or at least face a higher level of prices. And the reason is something that we call data barter. So firms will give us discounts because of their ability to make use of our data. And they don't do this because they're kind or generous or, it's profit maximizing. So suppose you're a firm that values data and you get some data from doing more transactions, right? Let's say we've got a book behind you, so selling more books, and every customer you sell a book to, you learn something about your customer base. You learn, who's buying it, what are their characteristics, what kind of operating system are they using, what time of day did they place their order, so forth. If this kind of data is valuable, then you're really going to want to sell more books. Now, of course, everybody wants to sell more books, right? Firms want to sell more of their stuff and they become more profitable. But if you care about the data, you have this extra reason to want to sell even more books. And so how do you sell even more books? Well, you got to drop your price. I mean, you could write a better book, but at the same price, but economically, that's kind of the same as dropping your price. So firms that value data will maximize their profit by reducing their price a little bit. Because by reducing their price a little bit, they'll do more of these transactions. And yes, they'll sell more books, but they'll also get more valuable data, right? So the desire to accumulate data leads firms to optimally, in their own interest, reduce the price of the goods that they sell. Now, the consumer may not be aware that there's no advertised data discount when you buy a book or most other things. But still, without the data incentive to sell, firms would optimally be charging a higher price. And the firm itself may not even really be aware that this is what it's doing. Most firms probably are not thinking, well, what's our data discount? They're simply experimenting with different pricing strategies and finding the one that maximizes the profit. And if they just mess around with their prices and find the one that generates the greatest revenue for them, they're going to settle on one that actually incorporates a data discount without even necessarily knowing it. And so sometimes these are explicit. So, for example, if you go to a supermarket that has a discount card, right? Discount cards are data collection devices. They're a way of linking purchases for the same consumer throughout time, and they'll give you a discount for using the card. But if you sign up for that card, what you're really signing away is the right to use your data. So you're explicitly given a discount for the right to use your data. Or here in the United States, if you go to a Whole Foods supermarket and you let them scan your Amazon Prime QR code, they'll give you some discount on your grocery basket. Meta recently has offered, kind of on the flip side, they had been offering a free service, right, which was Facebook. Now, Facebook's not truly free, right? Facebook is exchanging a digital service, which is the use of Facebook, which costs Facebook lots, right? They pay employees to maintain this and so forth. And they give you the service in exchange for your data. Now, that's not free, right? We don't necessarily always want to give up all of our data for use by the company, but there's a quid pro quo. There's a barter trade. I call it a barter because that's the word economists use when we do a trade that doesn't involve money changing hands, right? So we're trading our data directly for Facebook. And so recently Meta said, well, there's been a lot of uproar about privacy, about people who do not want to give up their data. So that's okay. If you don't want to give up your data, you just need to pay $14 a month for the use of Facebook. And that caused an enormous amount of uproar. How dare you charge us, right, for the privilege of keeping our data private? But the way that I see that is Facebook costs $14 a month. You can pay for that in one of two ways. Option A, you can pay money, $14. Option B, you can pay with your data, and your data is in lieu of the money that you would otherwise pay. So you choose the currency you would like to use to pay for this digital service. So I actually see Facebook as costing $14 a month with a discount if you're willing to supply your data. So these are all various ways. Back to your original question, how does it affect pricing? Data is a force for keeping prices lower than they otherwise would be. It's not a freebie, right? We're getting lower monetary prices because we're paying with money and with data. And I think we've recognized this for a while for free stuff, but I think it's happening for all of the transactions that we do in the economy.
One key application you discuss is how data shapes firm and investor behavior. So how does access to valuable data alter decision making at the firm level, and what impact does it have on financial markets?
Right. So data, as we talked about, data is a tool for making better predictions. And so it allows firms to make fewer mistakes. It allows investors to make fewer mistakes. And that's really its core. Now, that sounds innocuous. I mean, it sounds great, in fact, right? Why wouldn't we want to have fewer mistakes in the world? And and I think in most instances, this is a force for efficiency, right? For making everybody better off, or creating more gains from from trade, from production, and so forth in the world. So that's all great. The problem is that sometimes it will help somebody to make fewer mistakes in something that is not a good endeavor. So, for example, a lot of people are really worried about manipulative ads. Maybe political manipulation, maybe encouraging you to overspend and buy too much stuff that you don't need. And data is absolutely used to help identify people who would be susceptible to this manipulation and serve them exactly the material that's likely to make them take actions that maybe aren't in their interest or aren't in the social interest. And okay, so data is helping the user of data to make fewer mistakes, right? It's allowing them to correctly target this manipulating content to the people that they want to target with them, but it might not be serving the social good. So the question is this really a problem with data, or is it really a problem with manipulative content? So I would say the analogy here is kind of like when we use cars, we get places faster. And in most circumstances, that's fantastic. But cars also help people rob banks more efficiently, right? Because if you don't have a car, it's kind of hard to get away with money. So do we then say, well, we have a car problem because cars enable bank robberies? Or do we say, yeah, but this isn't a car problem, this is a bank robbery problem. So let's let's leave the cars alone and focus on the real harm and make sure that our banks are safe. So I think data is kind of like the car here that's allowing a lot of things to happen more efficiently. And sometimes it enables bad things to happen more efficiently, but we should really focus on preventing those bad things from happening. So, in financial market context as well, in general, having more informed traders is a good thing, right? It should allow for prices to be, more informative, to be more reflective of true value. But there are going to be people who get more data than other traders and, use it to try to take advantage of them or to front run them or to manipulate prices and, in asset markets to do things that are bad more efficiently, right? So, data is a force for efficiency. Sometimes it allows us to, commit crimes or do horrible things that are not in the social good more efficiently. And in those cases, we should really focus on the harmful behavior and not blame data as a whole.
Professor Veldkamp, in your research, you examine the role of data and market power. Can you elaborate on how firms leverage data to gain a competitive advantage and how this affects their market power?
Sure. So there are a number of aspects to this question. So firms absolutely use data to try to maximize their profits. And part of the way firms maximize their profits is to try to stake a claim to a market, try to outcompete their rivals, to try to create a moat around them so that others can't, steal their market share. And but this is an exercise of market power. So, this really falls in the category of data helps you do everything more efficiently, including some things that might not benefit consumers. So, the first thing to recognize is that data does make firms more efficient. And so a firm that has lots of data and that can operate more efficiently will probably outcompete its rivals. It's going to have a lower cost basis, right? More efficient production means I can produce the same thing at a with less inputs, with greater efficiency, with lower cost. And so, that is going to help a firm compete. But that's kind of the good competition, right? We want the firms that are better at doing things to succeed and outcompete their rivals. It also is used to help guide firms in what they decide to do, right? So understanding your market, understanding your customer base, understanding who's buying what and what else they might want to buy with that. So that helps firms to shift towards focusing on the parts of the aspects of their business that are most profitable. And that sounds great and smart, but it also shows up as firms producing higher markup goods, right? So a markup is the price you sell it at divided by its marginal cost. And those markups are often used as measures of monopoly power, right? A monopolist is going to charge a price is way higher than its cost. So firms are going to use data to find those goods for which the price they can sell it at is way higher than their marginal cost, because those are the most profitable things to produce, right? But that's going to make that firm have a higher markup. So it's going to, the same firm doing the same things and charging the same prices, if it shifts the composition of things it does towards those more profitable things, is going to look less competitive. And maybe it is or maybe it isn't. I'm not sure. We have to decide what we mean by that. But it certainly raises the measures of monopoly power. And then the third piece is that data really encourages firms to be large. And the reason is if I take two firms and I merge them together, they're not just the sum of the parts, because now both parts can use the data of both firms, right? So now both firms are more efficient. Both firms can tilt their portfolio mix towards these high value products. Both can outcompete their rivals. And so there's a strong force for mergers, for creating fewer firms at larger scale, because those larger scale firms will naturally have more data. And those firms really can create sort of bad effects in the market where they're just too big, and they have too much ability to manipulate market prices. So there's some issues with measurement, and there's some real concerns out there about monopoly power, and data really interacts with all of these.
The book emphasizes the welfare effects of data economies. So how do you envision the distribution of data's benefits and cost, and what policy implications might arise from these considerations?
Yeah. So clearly there are gains from data, right? If we make fewer mistakes, there'll be more surplus. There'll be more stuff produced at lower cost, and a larger pie. And the question is, how do we slice it? Okay? And so, in general, when we think about how do we slice the gains from production, it boils down to competition in a market. If firms are perfectly competitive, what that means is that anytime I make a little bit of profit, you with your competing firm is going to swoop in and undercut me a little bit, because, well, if my profit is 1 cent, you'll be willing to enter and make half a cent, because at least it's half a cent profit, right? And so firms sort of compete away all of the gains. They'll earn just enough to cover all their costs and pay their managers and pay off their investors and so forth, but nothing more. And so in that world, all the gains from data would flow to the consumers. Now, I don't think we're in that world, and there are a few reasons why not. Some of them are the standard imperfect competition stuff I've mentioned before, but the other reason is that right now there's a bundling problem. So back to this question of let's go to Facebook, and Facebook costs $14 a month, but you can pay for it with your data. So Facebook has unbundled the data transaction from the ability to use Facebook. So Facebook costs $14 a month. And then there's a question of, would you like to use your data to pay that $14 worth of value, or would you rather use money? So the question, you can use Facebook with or without a data sale. Most transactions we do in the economy don't have that choice. If I want to go buy a book from Amazon, there's no option to buy it without giving them my data. So the price that I face is probably a little bit lower because Amazon really wants my data, but I am essentially forced to either buy the book and give my data, or no book and no data, right? So that's a bundled transaction. I'm selling Amazon my data effectively, and they're selling me a book, but I can't do those two things. I can't do just one or the other. And bundling is typically thought of as really anti-competitive behavior. This is something that there's a long history of, the Federal Trade Commission going after firms that are bundling and saying you can't do that. That's bad for consumers. It reduces choice. It reduces surplus. We should, unbundle these. And so, I think that the natural analogy here is that rather than being outraged that, firms like Facebook say, I'm going to offer two different prices, You can keep your data, but there's a different price for that. We should encourage that kind of behavior. We should encourage there being two-tiered pricing services where there is a truly privacy protecting price that might be much higher than you're used to, right? But it's there. And if you don't want to sell your data, you can pay with just money. And our standard price that includes a data barter trade on the side. And one of the reasons for doing that is that even if a firm posts a really high protecting price, let's say I'm a bookseller, I really don't want to deal with the complexity of privacy protecting transactions. I'm not really set up to do that. I'm going to say, sure, you can have privacy protecting transaction. I can charge you $1 million for the book if you want that, because this is just such a pain to me to deal with, right? Okay, fine, right? We don't regulate prices. If you're bad at doing it, you're bad at doing it. But what's likely to happen then is another bookseller is likely to come in and say, you know what? I'm going to set up a privacy protecting book, based sales model. And all these people who really value their privacy, I'm going to offer them a good deal on book trades where I don't store their data. And so now you've got competition on that data margin. Their price is probably a little bit higher than Amazon's baseline price where you give away your data. But if I care a lot about privacy and I don't want to give it up, this is going to look like an awesome deal. And so now we've got competition both for books and for payments for data, or the price of privacy. And furthermore, as customers, if we see these two prices posted, we're going to start to learn about how valuable is our data. I think of data right now, it's a means of payment, but it's kind of like a foreign currency. If you've ever, say, gone on vacation or work to a country that's got some exchange rate that's, hard to wrap your head around. It's like, 14,527 to 1, right? Okay, then I see a price for, 75,000 or something for lunch. And I'm trying to figure out, is that a good deal for lunch? God, how many is that? Right? It's hard to transact in this new currency. I don't have a good sense for what it's worth and for what the price level is and so forth. So that's how I feel about my data right now. I study it. I know it has value. How much value does it have? I don't know. I feel like I just arrived in this foreign country and I'm trying to figure out, like, how much is this currency really worth and what will it buy me? But if you start posting these two prices, it's like you've been in that country with that foreign currency for a few weeks and you're getting the hang of it. You're like, okay, that's not a good price for lunch. I know I can do much better over here. And so we'll learn to value data as a currency and we'll get better and more savvy at transacting.
Professor, many of the tools you present are based on the theoretical methods of macroeconomics and finance. How can practitioners and researchers use these tools to better understand and navigate the evolving data-driven economy?
We're not at a point in this research agenda where we've got real clear facts and takeaways. I wish I could say that we are. Where we're at is we're developing a vocabulary. We're starting from basic principles and saying, okay, how can we rebuild the structures that we use to measure, that we use for policy analysis, that we use to predict how what transformations and growth rates and so forth in the future will be. Those current structures aren't built to incorporate data in any meaningful way. I mean, we use data with them as economists, but they don't really think about the economics of data. So we're trying to rebuild those structures, and this is kind of like developing a new alphabet, right? And you're saying, well, what's the finale to the novel? And I'm like, well, we haven't written the novel yet. We've just developed an alphabet, right? So stay tuned. And now that we have an alphabet, we'll build up words and we'll build up paragraphs and structures and we'll get to that novel. And I think we'll get there within a few years. But we don't quite have the punchlines and the clear takeaways yet that I would like to, just because this is a young science.
Professor Veldkamp, looking ahead, what areas of research do you think hold the most potential for advancing our understanding of the data economy, particularly in terms of policy analysis or economic theory?
I think probably the single most important thing we need to understand is this competition question. And the reason is because, as I said, data is clearly growing the pie, is clearly allowing greater efficiency. Greater efficiency means greater gains, greater surplus. But the real question is who gets those gains, right? And a lot of the turmoil in society right now comes from people feeling like they're not sharing the prosperity, right? They see riches growing around them. They see new innovations. They see people getting unfathomably rich, and they're not sharing in that sense of growing prosperity. And that could happen with data and AI as well. And so, really, the central question is, are we going to be able to put in place policies and market structures that will allow everyday people to reap some of the benefits, right? Maybe they won't become billionaires. That's, not likely to happen for most of us. But can we see some real benefits in our lives, in our incomes? Maybe it's just maybe we get the same income, but we face much lower prices. And so we're able to afford a better standard of living going forward. Maybe data will open up entirely new professions of people who are able to monetize the gains of their data and sit there most days providing labeling images and providing feedback about here's how a human would respond to this circumstance and here's what I like and here's what I don't like. And we can harness benefits from this data and AI driven economy for ordinary people, or we can let them just scrape by and give them enough just to induce them to to do the work or to buy the product, but really all the gains flow to a concentrated set of interests that own the data assets, and that would be really unfortunate. And so finding ways to create a competitive landscape that doesn't just willy-nilly break stuff up, right? That doesn't prohibit firms' use of data. Because if we prohibit firms' use of data, we're throwing away the gains, and then nobody benefits, right? That's not the solution. We want for everybody to benefit. So how do we create an environment in which firms thrive and they experiment and they use data to be efficient, but they also compensate people for it in a meaningful way, in a tangible way to improve the lives of everybody who's participating in this data economy. And today that's pretty much all of us.
Listeners, as we wrap up this fascinating conversation, let's extend a warm thank you to Professor Laura Veldkamp for joining us on today's podcast. We hope you found the discussion insightful and thought-provoking. The book, Data Economy, is available on major retail outlets and online stores. Professor Laura Veldkamp, our sincere thanks for your invaluable contributions. Until next time, take care and keep learning. Thank you, Professor Laura.
Thank you, Deepak.